Hi, everybody. We are back at it. We are in chapter 9. We are talking about love and sexuality for adolescents and emerging adults. It's going to probably get a little uncomfortable talking about some of this stuff. I know it does for me. I have adolescent children myself and remember very clearly this aspect of my life. When I was an adolescent, even though I would probably rather not in some cases. And so we've all been there. We can blush as necessary, but we're just going to plow ahead and deal with it, okay? Now, when we're talking love, romance, dating, sex, all of this, things look a little different now than perhaps they did when I was in the game 2025. Wow, it's been a while. A long time ago. Um, and now, granted, I was not dating in the 70s. I was alive in the 70s, just for like the last 6 months of the 70s. But I didn't actually start dating and really thinking about romance and all that stuff until, mid 90s. So that we still called it dating then. What I love though is that our textbook, as much as they try and keep it updated, cannot keep up because I do not hear anybody saying that they are going with or hanging out with. I mean, hanging out maybe, seeing someone. I hear much more. I'm talking to someone, right? Which, I mean, are we talking in Braille? How are we talking? But nevertheless, that's what a lot of kids say, right? And honestly, it makes some level of sense because a lot of the interactions are going to be digitally mediated, right? So you're texting somebody, you're sending them messages and Snapchats and texts and whatnot. And so, yeah, there's probably going to be a lot more talking than going out or going on dates, right? Not to say that those things can't still happen, don't happen, but comparatively, I mean, again, you think about folks my generation, if I was interested in a girl, um, I mean, it depended on the context, right? If she was in a class that I was in or um, in a play that I was in high school or something like that, then sure, we would hang out because we were doing a shared activity and that's how we'd get to know each other. But if and when I wanted to make my interest known and wanted to actually, pair off with this girl, I was expected to take her on dates. And not saying that I was particularly good at any of that. I wasn't great at planning dates or anything like that, but that was the expectation of the time. And so we'd go out to a movie or go to dinner or go do something else. Axe throwing wasn't really a thing back in those days, or I probably would have done that. Anyway, going to date dances and things like that. All of this stuff still happens. Um, and I'm sort of speaking from a deep well of ignorance in terms of talking about what happens now because other than going out on the occasional date with my wife, it's been a long time since I've had to worry about any of this. Thank goodness I don't miss it. I have great sympathy for those of you who are in this process right now because boy, it sucks trying to find somebody that you like and that likes you back and then navigating that because other people are hard to deal with. Ugh. Anyways, so increasingly as you move across the generations within Western society, dating gets more casual, more informal. If you want a really fun time, go and look on YouTube. These are actually some videos that I used to show in class when I actually had class in person for this course that showed what the dating expectations were for. This was a film that was made in like the 1940s. It is comical, right? It is crazy. And in fact, given that it is a film made in the 1940s, it's probably not even the social norms of the 1940s. It's probably the norms of the people who were making the film who were probably dating in like the 1920s, right? And so it's real old style. And it's a lot of fun to watch. I will try to remember to actually stick those down below my own videos so that you can see them too, because it's a hoot. Anyhow, it just sort of goes to show how things have changed over time. Now, talk to somebody that's a little bit older, and they will almost invariably say that the change is for the worse, because that seems to be how older folks do, right? How they did it was the right way to do it, and how kids do it now is a problem. That's not necessarily true. I would love to see what would happen if you were to go back to like the 1950s and give everybody smartphones and see what a mess that would be, right? I think that kids nowadays are probably handling it much better than they would, but whatever. Better, worse, indifferent. It's just not the same as it was, and that tends to be how the world progresses, whether we're talking about romance or anything else for that matter. Okay, we do have some research that looks into what's the point of romance in adolescence, right? Because there is a question to be asked like, wait, these are generally speaking individuals who are not ready either emotionally or physically, and certainly not psychologically, nor financially, to actually be pairing off and like taking care of each other. So what are we even doing, right? There's still plenty of parents who think that. They're like, you can pump the brakes and come back to this conversation here in a decade, because what are you doing right now? You should be going to school. You should be paying attention to your self-improvement, et cetera, et cetera. Well, teens are never going to listen to that messaging, because it turns out that there are actually some real uses, some real adaptive benefits to engaging in romantic behavior from adolescence onward, right? And it's a very, very rare adolescent that is not highly interested in experimenting with romance, right? Because there's a lot that is wrapped up in being an adult that you learn through romantic relationships that can really only be learned that way. One of the primary markers, if not the primary marker, of being an adult in most societies is pairing off, being the object of a successful romantic attachment. Now, traditionally, that meant marriage, and to a large extent, it still means that in our society, although we've broadened perhaps our definitions a little bit. But that's a big part of what it means to be an adult, is to be able to catch the interest of somebody that is attractive to you and form a long-lasting bond with them. Now, that is going to take a lot of practice and a lot of effort and a lot of growth, and you're probably not going to learn how to do that very successfully unless you attempt it early on and make some, tentative efforts in that direction. So, what are the purposes? What are the things that kids gain from experimenting with romance and with relationships? Well, it gives you an opportunity to go and do some of the fun things that you would like to do anyway, in the presence of somebody that you really like. Now, I don't know if you have ever noticed that the things that you like doing are more fun when you do them with someone who also likes them, and preferably likes you. Whether you're talking about a romantic relationship or a close friendship, any of the things that you enjoy are more fun with somebody who is close to you, somebody that you're intimate with, right? I remember, this is a long time ago. This is when I first got married back in 2005 or something. The Simpsons movie came out. And I went and saw it with a buddy and just laughed my butt off. Thought it was hilarious. Loved it. Was talking about it days later. And when it came out on video, I rented it to watch with my wife. She hated it. She thought it was the stupidest thing. I'm not saying she's wrong, but she couldn't stand watching it. We actually turned it off halfway through, because not only was she not enjoying it, I didn't enjoy the movie, because I was constantly checking in with her on all the funny bits, and she wasn't laughing, right? And so that's the opposite side of that coin. But really, having somebody who is into you and into the things that you like makes recreation a whole lot more enjoyable. That's why we do things with friends, and one of the primary reasons we have romantic partners. As I was saying, there is a whole bunch of sort of learning how to be an adult that goes on in romantic relationships. How do I treat this person respectfully? How am I supposed to behave towards the object of my affections? what are acceptable ways to speak, what are unacceptable ways to speak, what are unacceptable ways to behave around this person or to behave when this person is not around. What kind of trouble am I going to get into with them, in terms of behaving in ways that they don't like, and how am I going to resolve that? How do I fight with someone without being an absolute monster? How can we disagree and still be kind to each other? All of this stuff is sort of wrapped up in romantic relationships from adolescence. Uh, you gain status as an adolescent if you have a romantic partner. I'm certain you remember this. The kids who were dating in high school, it was a signal to all of the other kids around that they were desirable, that they were interesting, that they were attractive, and that somebody was into them. And so it's a law of economics. The more desire there is, the more demand there is for any given thing or person, the more people are going to be interested in that thing or person just because somebody else wants it, right? It's this funny way that the human brain works. Companionship, having somebody to be around, loneliness is a really difficult thing to weather as an adolescent, as we talked about, I think, last week. And having somebody else that is willing to spend a good amount of time around you helps stave that off and give you somebody else to bounce your ideas off of instead of the walls. Intimacy, not just physically, although that's a huge part of romance starting in adolescence, but also emotional intimacy. You are going to practice your emotional intimacy in opening up and being vulnerable to people, as well as trying on physical intimacy behaviors with a romantic partner in a way that you likely are not going to do with your close friends, right? And courtship, again, this idea of preparing for adulthood. I may not be ready to make a long-term commitment to somebody, but I know that I'm going to eventually, and let's try that on for size. Let's play act it a little bit and see what that looks like. It's not that you're lying. It's not that you're saying things that you don't mean. It is that you are learning how to mean what you say, right? When you tell somebody that you love them and that you're going to take care of them and that you're going to be exclusive with them and all of that stuff, right? Okay. Now, when it comes to the expectations of romance, we've got some gendered expectations, unsurprisingly. Males are expected to be more proactive and outgoing in the pursuit of their crushes, and females are expected to be more receptive, right? To sort of hang back and wait for the guy, generally speaking, to approach them to say, "Hey, will you go out with me?" Or "Let's hang out." Whatever, however that gets said, I don't know. I am clueless. Now, there are, like I said, there's a lot of benefits to romantic relationships starting in adolescence. We sort of listed all of those already. It's not all roses, unfortunately. There are some downsides that come with romantic relationships, as anybody who has experienced this knows, because it's sometimes hard to get along with a romantic partner, and especially if you are in adolescence or emerging adulthood, the likelihood of that romantic relationship lasting in the long term is pretty low, right? You're still figuring this out. You're still trying it on for size. And so you are likely to make some mistakes and or pick somebody that you're not terribly well suited to. And somewhere along the way, one or the other of you is going to be like, I'm out. Sorry, this ain't working. And so there is the difficulties of breakups that we'll talk about a little bit more here in a minute. And increasingly in our more and more informal dating society, it's hard to tell where the line is between a friend that I'm hanging out with and a friend that I'm hanging out with, right? Am I talking to this person or am I talking to this person? So as there are fewer sort of formalized events that are markers for a relationship's progress. It gets harder and harder to know, is this a romantic relationship, especially when, again, I'll talk about this a little bit more here in a minute. You've got the rise of what you might call friends with benefits, where folks are not looking for a romantic relationship but are looking for sex. And is that a relationship? Are we together? No, not really. But it feels like it. And so how do we, where are we at? What's going on? It can be really difficult to tell. The older you get, the less negativity there tends to be in romantic relationships, the more positivity as you move from early adolescence through to emerging adulthood. You figure it out a little bit more. People tend to treat each other a little bit better, hopefully, and make fewer mistakes, and as a result, feel more satisfaction in their relationships. Okay, let's talk about Sternberg's theory of love. I mean, if you're going to name a theory something, that's a pretty good name. It's pretty overarching. And as you'll see, I've actually got a figure here in a couple of slides that I'll show you. It's really nice. It's really simple. There are three fundamental aspects of love, Sternberg says, that relationships tend to have. And those are passion, intimacy, and commitment. And you can put each one of those on the point of a triangle, right? So those are the three aspects of love. And depending on how much of each one of those you have, there are different styles and types of love that can sort of incorporate all relationships that a person has, right? So I'll show you these other terms on the triangle itself here in just a minute, as well as these other ones. So essentially, here we go. Here's the picture of Sternberg's love triangle. Now, not a triangle with three people in it. These are the three aspects of love, right? So if you have nothing but intimacy in a relationship, meaning emotional closeness, that is a relationship that is marked by liking, right? Now, and recognize this is not just romantic relationships that we're talking about here. I have had at different times in my life platonic relationships where I was very intimate with the person, where we were really emotionally close and really dependent on each other, and that's somebody that I like a lot, right? That is the hallmark of liking, is emotional intimacy. Now, if I have both intimacy and passion, which is sort of the physical, sexual aspect of it, then you follow along the diagonal line between those 2 points, and you've got romantic love, a relationship that has both intimacy, emotional intimacy, and physical passion. Then you've got a romantic kind of love. Now, if there's no intimacy there and only passion, right, it's just only the physical connection, that is what Sternberg called infatuation, right? I just have to be with this person. They're amazing. I don't know anything about them, but man, are they hot, and are they a good kisser? So that's, infatuation. Now, if you've got both passion and commitment, right, which is sort of on the other lower point here, you follow that bottom line across, and you see when you've got both of those, that is what they call fatuous love, which doesn't sound awesome. Fatuous means silly or unthinking or stupid. So you've got a stupid love. Anyways, so you can see where that's coming from, though, right? So this is somebody that you've super got the hots for, and you are all in on a relationship with them. And also there is no intimacy. You don't know this person. You are not emotionally connected to this person, but you are all in, and boy, the sex is good. Okay, well, that's fatuous love. All right, now moving to the other bottom corner, if all you've got is commitment, then that is what Sternberg called empty love. That's a pretty judgy term, in my opinion. Let's think for a second about a pair of 85-year-olds that have been married for 55 years, or 60 years even, let's say. They are probably not hot to trot in the bedroom anymore, right? Their passion is probably quite low. And I don't know if you've ever met one of these older couples. They don't seem to talk to each other or spend much time together. They're in the same house. They sleep next to each other. They are committed to each other. They're not going anywhere, but they each sort of do their own thing. Um, I can see where the term empty love comes from. Don't get me wrong, but I think if you've weathered that long together, you deserve a moniker that is perhaps a little kinder than empty love, right? I certainly hope that when I reach that stage in my life with my wife, if we're both still alive, that we still like each other, right? And we're probably not going to be having sex at that point. Let's be real honest. But I hope there's more to our relationship than that. But if I'm looking at another couple, and it seems to me that they've got nothing but commitment, I mean, let's give folks a break, right? Anyways, that's my little soapbox. I'll get off of it. Now, if you've got commitment and intimacy but no passion, that is what is called companionate love, according to Sternberg. And you might see this kind of love in a non-romantic relationship as well. There are folks who have long-term, very close, very important relationships where they even live with the other person, but are never necessarily romantic or paired in that sense, but are just committed to each other for the long run. They've got each other's backs. That's awesome too, right? Now, according to Sternberg, the ideal kind of love is the consummate love, right here in the middle of the triangle, that has intimacy and passion and commitment, right? So you like each other, you're attracted to each other, and you're all in. You're going to take care of each other. That sounds pretty good to me. And I mean, honestly, when you look at when the research looks at a whole host of relationships, you can identify pretty clearly the levels of each one of these three that a relationship has. Pretty cool. All right, now, how does love work? Well, it's going to depend on the society and the culture, obviously. But generally speaking, across cultures, we all as humans really strongly seem to prefer people who are similar to us. Birds of a feather flock together versus opposites attract. It seems that the birds of the feather win out 9 times out of 10, which is not to say that there can't be opposites attracting, because there are so many different sort of domains and levels on which you can find similarity with somebody, that you can have people who are very different in some aspects of their life and maybe butt heads or maybe complement each other in ways that the other is not able to bring to the table. But I promise you that those folks, if they've got a happy long-term relationship, have multiple aspects of their lives in which they are very similar to each other, because that is overwhelmingly what humans prefer. So that seems to be what wins out most times. And those folks where you're like, wow, what are you guys even doing together? But it seems to work. Come back in 5 years and see how they're doing. They will either be more similar to each other or they will no longer be together. That's how it works. Okay, Bradford Brown looked at sort of how the learning of love works for adolescents. I'm struggling to come up with a better term of it in terms of, we're talking about how the stages that they move through in moving towards relationships. The initiation phase starts pretty early on in adolescence, where there starts to be a lot of thought dedicated to romance. An obsession is not an inappropriate term for a lot of young adolescents, where this is suddenly a very important part of life. And you probably remember this happening too, where you're like, oh, there's this romance thing happening. I need in on that. I don't know how it works, but everybody's talking about it and everybody's making songs about it, and that's what all the movies are about. What am I even missing? I have got to figure this out. I've got to get on this train, right? So that's the initiation phase, where you begin to attempt to spend more time with the objects of your affection. I keep saying objects of affection. That's kind of a weird term. The people that you like. How about that instead? And begin to try to attempt some romantic behaviors. You get a little further on through adolescence and you move into the status phase where, once again, you begin to recognize that there is a social difference for those who are romantically paired, and that then serves as added impetus to seek out relationships and take them more seriously and try to figure out how that works. Change whatever your behavior is or your appearance is that's not working for you so that you can attract a partner. The affection phase tends to hit during later adolescence. We're talking 15, 16, 17 here, where kids begin to pair off into couples and experiment not only with emotional intimacy, but also physical intimacy, starting to get into sexual behavior. And then the bonding phase is usually during emerging adulthood, where you're moving beyond just sort of the liking and the physical attraction to like, oh, this is supposed to be something that is supposed to be a long-term part of my life. So this is somebody that I am going to really create close ties with and try and create a life with, right? So that may not happen all at once. So these phases can be split across a bunch of different partners, and probably are for the average adolescent in Western society. And they don't necessarily, these phases don't necessarily happen at the same time for everybody. I know folks in their 30s and 40s who are still struggling with the bonding phase, where they're like, no, I just want to have fun. And, we can chat and go out and have sex, and that'll be fun, and then go home, right? But generally speaking, these are the phases that most folks move through. Now, a big part of especially those first two phases are what we call consensual validation, which is the idea that you are looking for folks who are going to confirm the choices that you make by making the same ones themselves, or approving of your choices, right? So you've got a couple of cute little band nerds here. They are both into the same thing, and it then is that much easier for them to appreciate each other, share time together, share activities together, and appreciate each other's successes and failures, and support each other in the things that are important to them, whether that's band or whatever the case may be, right? Okay, but of course we are talking about adolescence here, so the breakup is almost inevitable. Yeah, sure, there are folks who end up with their childhood sweethearts, but that is overwhelmingly the exception rather than the rule. So, yeah, most of us have been there, either on the receiving end or the giving end, probably both for a lot of us. Why do folks break up their romantic relationships? Well, there's a few different reasons. As I was mentioning before, with, opposites attracting and that not tending to work out in the long run, folks who are not terribly similar to each other tend to drift apart over time. And the younger you are, the quicker and more easily that happens, because you are both in the process of changing even as you are attempting the relationship at the same time. So the likelihood of growing apart, finding different aspects of your personalities that are not compatible with each other and making those primary, it's higher, right? So low levels of similarity, low levels of love and intimacy if you're not taking good care of each other, right? If you're not good at being the boyfriend or girlfriend, then that relationship is probably not going to last very long. And, of course, sometimes you're just not into them, right? I'm sure plenty of folks have experienced that, where it's like, you have got all of the characteristics that I really feel like I should want, and I am just not feeling it. Time to move on. Those are never easy conversations, whether you are the one who is doing the moving on or the one who is being moved upon. Because, especially on that last one, right? How do you tell somebody that you're awesome, but I am so bored with you. I just am not feeling it anymore. Peace. I'm out. Yeah. Now, it's not to say that can't happen to adults too, right? There are marriages that break up over this too, where it's like, you know what? I am not enjoying this relationship anymore. I mean, nothing's terribly wrong, but I'm out, right? Hopefully you figure out how to do that and how to spot those warning signs early on. That's part of the reason for romantic relationships during adolescence, is so that you can be like, oh, you know, that these things that I thought were important to me are not going to be enough to keep me attracted to you in the long run. So let's figure that out before we exchange the vows and go to the courthouse and all that stuff. Now, the breakup of a romantic relationship is always difficult because of what it says about you as an individual. I could not make this work, and this is a huge part of what it means to be a human adult. I feel bad about that. Whether I was broken up with or whether I've broken up with somebody else, it means that I did something wrong. It didn't work in the way that I wanted it to and hoped it would, and that's going to be painful. And you do tend to see higher levels of depressive behavior and symptomatology post breakup for pretty much everybody. And unfortunately, especially during adolescence, you tend to post breakup see a decent amount of romantic harassment where one or the other of the individuals, sometimes both, sort of alternately, harass each other, won't leave each other alone, are interfering in other relationships, or texting the person, sending bullying or unkind texts, or slashing tires, breaking headlights on the higher end of the harassment scale. Don't do that, by the way. That's not going to work out well for anybody. But you are much more likely to see that kind of romantic harassment during adolescence than you are in emerging adulthood, and even less so in full adulthood. Not to say it doesn't still happen, but it happens a lot less the older you get. So, most common breakup reasons listed here: we didn't have common interests, we couldn't talk to each other, we had different ideas about sex, we had different ideas about marriage, our families were too different, the places that we come from are too different. I just wanted to be on my own for a while. My partner wanted to be on their own for a while. I was bored with the relationship. They were bored with the relationship. They left me for somebody else. Nobody likes that last one, but it happens. Okay, now, in terms of how these relationships tend to progress, as you are getting to emerging adulthood, cohabitation is an increasingly popular choice. Cohabitation just meaning moving in together without getting legally married, right? Now, there are cultural differences here. In the United States, cohabitation is common, but tends to be brief and unstable, for lack of a better term. Folks will move in together, try it on for a few weeks or a few months, didn't work out, they're out, they're living on their own again, or have moved in with somebody else. Hopefully not immediately, but, whatever. Different parts of Europe do this differently too, right? So in Southern Europe, Spain, Portugal, cohabitation is much less likely. In Northern Europe, cohabitation is much more likely and tends to be much more stable, right? So you'll find significant percentages of Norwegians and other Northern Europeans who will cohabitate and never marry, right? But this is their, person that they're going to stay with for the duration, but they just never bother with the marriage aspect of it. Now, when it comes to cohabitation, especially here in the United States, there is a very common strain of thought, especially amongst emerging adults, that I need to try out what it's like to be married. If I am going to commit to this person for the long run, I need to make sure that they're nice and that I like them all of the time and not just part of the time. So it will probably work out better for us if we move in together first and we try this on for size for a while, and then if it's working, we'll make it official. Interestingly, although this is a logical train of thought, it ends up not working out that way. The numbers do tend to show that folks who cohabitate prior to marriage are more likely to divorce rather than less. Now, this seems illogical on the face of it, right? I mean, they tried it out, right? They know what they're getting themselves into. Why would they not stick it out? Why would they not be more likely to stick it out once they marry? Well, there's a couple of reasons here. Despite the fact that what was I going to say there? Despite the fact that, wow, I just blanked. I'm sorry. Um, Despite the fact that it makes sense that folks would get along better, there is a personality level of variable that has to be attended to here. Um, while cohabitation is more common and more acceptable here in the United States than it used to be, it is still not what is the acceptable norm. It is not the default option. Marriage is still sort of the expected default in our society. And so folks who are willing to flout those societal norms, even though they're less strong than they used to be, are folks who are then more likely, sort of from on a personality level, more likely to flout the norms of you are supposed to stay married once you get married. Right? So that's one aspect of it, right? Folks who are willing to disobey the rules, for lack of a better term, on the front end are more likely to disobey the rules on the back end and divorce. To the extent that the term rules even makes sense here. There is also the aspect that a lot of relationships take a good long while to fall apart, right? You may not necessarily be happy, but it's working well enough, and so you keep kicking the can down the road. And okay, I really do love you, and this is a really good relationship. So yeah, we've been together for 6 months. We've been together for a year. Let's go ahead and get married. That's the sensible thing to do now. We've had our trial run. Let's go for it. But you may just not be to the breaking point in that relationship yet, right? And usually that has to do with, we've got 2 or 3 kids now, and we are at our poorest and most stressed that we are ever going to be. And also, I was never really all the way in the first place. Time to go, right? So, there are several different reasons why that is the case, but just something to think about if you are in this aspect of in this phase of life yourself. While it seems to make sense that moving in first would increase your chances of a long marriage, not necessarily the case. Which is not to say that every cohabitating couple is bound to divorce, right? That is not what I'm saying here. We're talking likelihoods and percentages, and those percentages are slightly higher for those who cohabit before marriage. But I know a handful of couples myself that, moved in together when they were 22, 23, 24 years old, and here they are in their mid 40s, and they've since gotten married, and they're perfectly happy and seem to be willing to stick it out in the long run. So, how do we choose somebody to marry when we are feeling comfortable enough with the romance thing that we're like, okay, it's time to move to the next level. Now this is my permanent romance partner. Well, you do see differences in terms of what things people value most highly across cultures, but across the board, mutual attraction and having a dependable character seem to be pretty universal, right? So this needs to be somebody that I like and that likes me, and I need to know that they're not going to go off the deep end tomorrow, right? That they are somebody that I can depend on in the long run. So long as you've got those, no matter where you're living, those tend to be really important for a successful marriage. Now, in some parts of the world, other characteristics matter more than others. So you've got listed here in terms of cross-cultural differences in some Middle Eastern and Far Eastern cultures. Chastity is more important, and unfortunately, generally speaking, at least from a Western perspective, unfortunately, that is almost always pointed towards the women, right? There is an expectation in a lot of these cultures that men are expected to come to marriage with some sexual experience, and women are expected to come to the marriage with no sexual experience. So, that just depends on the culture. So, in Western society, I'm sorry, no, this isn't in Western society. This is cross-culturally, so this is sort of averaging across a bunch of different places in the world. you can see that broken down for men and for women, sort of the most important things. There are a couple of weird things on this chart that make me suspect that there are a few errors here that I'll talk about here in just a second. But I couldn't find a more current or fixed one, and so this is the best I've got. So there are more commonalities in these two lists than there are differences. As you can see right up top, mutual attraction, dependable character, emotional stability, education and intelligence are both very high, pleasing disposition, sociability, good health, right? Desire for home and children. So these are matching up almost all the way down, except there are a couple of weird things, right? So desire for home and children is actually listed twice on the men's side, and so there's a mistake there somewhere. And I do believe that it is probably the accurate one is the higher one, that ranks highly for men looking at women. Does the woman desire a home and children? That's going to be probably more important for the man than it is for the woman. Not unimportant for the woman, just slightly less so. I don't know what number 9 is supposed to be on the men's side. That's what the primary thing I was trying to look at. The other thing that I find very interesting is that good financial prospects is low on the list for men and not on the list at all for women. And just from a logical standpoint, if we're talking sort of cross-culturally across the world, there are still lots of places where the man being able to provide for the family is still of primary importance for women. And so I am shocked and assume it's a mistake that financial prospects is not somewhere on the list there for women looking at men. Yeah, but once again, I was unable to find updated stuff from this textbook, so this is the best I've got. Nevertheless, quibbles aside, this is an interesting look, and the thing that I find most interesting about it is that there is so much that matches up between men and women, even though the ranking may be slightly different. If we're talking about marriages in other cultures, there is still a strong movement toward arranged marriages in some parts of the world, more Eastern cultures, India, Pakistan, some in China still, and other Asian countries. Where these tend to occur more in more collectivistic societies, where the well-being of the family is more important than the well-being of the individual, where you are uniting families through marriage rather than finding folks who get along well. Interestingly, the success rates for arranged marriages don't seem to be terribly different from the success rates of more love-based marriages, which calls into question both our own ability to pick our own partners well and the speaks to the complexity of the marriage relationship. While it is definitely somebody that we, especially in Western society, care about as being our partner and someone who likes us and who sees the world the same way as us, and that we can meet as equal partners. On another level, marriage is absolutely a financial partnership and almost a small business, although in a very weird kind of way, right? Where you're creating children instead of products. Hopefully, your children are not products. That would be a problem. At any rate, there are other aspects to marriage that we don't pay a ton of attention to in Western society that nevertheless have a whole lot of impact on how a relationship is going to go across the lifespan. Are we able to get by financially? Do we have clear roles that the other person respects and is willing to defer on? And so, yeah, I mean, it can work out just fine so long as you are in a cultural milieu where that is acceptable and workable, right? So you develop the commitment first in these relationships, and hopefully you get to like each other and develop not just intimacy but also passion, right? And that's what everybody is hoping for, even if it's an arranged marriage. recognizing that it's not always going to be the case and that it may take a long time to really come to appreciate the other person. Intimacy is less expected in these kinds of relationships where it's like, oh, it'd be great if this was somebody that I could depend on, but I am not going to expect that to develop. I'm more likely to get my intimacy needs met by my same-sex peers and friends and whatnot. But you get fewer of these arranged marriages now than you did certainly 50 or 100 years ago. And a lot of the arranged marriages are semi-arranged, where the parents will get together and say, hey, this could be a good match. Let's get the kids together and see if they get along. And then if it develops and the kids like each other and they're willing to go forward with it, then the marriage proceeds. And so increasingly you got the young adults in the scenario having some say in it rather than, this is who you're going to marry. I guess you get to meet him across the altar, right? So that's more of a thing now than it used to be. Okay, I'm going to cut us off there, and we will come back with the rest of this stuff here in just a minute.